April 8, 1945, the entrance to the Kaiserode salt mine outside the village of Merkers, Thuringia, Germany. The ground here smells of sulfur and deep earth, and something else underneath both. The cold mineral dark of a place that has not been properly opened to the outside world in years. American soldiers from the 90th Infantry Division discovered the mine 4 days ago when 2 displaced French women, hitching a ride on a military vehicle in violation of curfew, mentioned to the MPs who stopped them that there was something significant buried inside it. That casual roadside conversation is now turning to one of the most extraordinary discoveries of the entire European war. 1,200 feet below the surface, in chambers carved out of ancient saltstone, the Third Reich has stored what it stole, the gold reserves of the German Reichsbank, currency from a dozen occupied nations, paintings pulled from museums across Europe, and in a separate sealed chamber, packed into wooden crates stacked floor to ceiling along 200 meters of mine passage, the contents of Jewish communities from Frankfurt, Vienna, Amsterdam, Krakow, Vilnius, Thessaloniki, and 40 other cities, Torah scrolls, silver ceremonial objects, illuminated manuscripts, community records, burial society registers, the documented existence of entire Jewish worlds that the Reich had decided should cease to exist, while their portable contents were preserved for a museum that Hitler intended to build as a monument to an exterminated people. A 25-year-old American corporal named Jacob Stern has been down in that chamber for 3 hours. He is holding a Torah scroll in both hands. His hands are not steady. They have not been steady since he read the label on the wooden crate it came from. Corporal Jacob Stern was 25 years old. He was born in Frankfurt am Main in 1920, the second son of a cantor named Avraham Stern, who led the morning services at the Bernerplatz synagogue in the old Jewish quarter of the city for 22 years. Jacob grew up inside the specific world of a synagogue cantor's household. Shabbat beginning precisely at sundown every Friday, the annual cycle of holidays marking time more reliably than any secular calendar, his father's voice filling the kitchen on Saturday mornings while he reviewed the week's liturgical portions. He was a serious boy who loved mathematics and maps and the particular silence of early mornings before the rest of the household woke. He was 16 when the family made the decision to leave, not after Kristallnacht, as many did, but 2 years earlier, in 1936, when his father came home from a meeting of the synagogue board and told his wife quietly that the men had agreed there was nothing left to wait and see about. They arrived in New York in March 1937. His father found work as a cantor in a congregation in Washington Heights, the neighborhood on the northern tip of Manhattan where so many German Jewish refugees had settled that it had acquired the nickname Frankfurt on the Hudson. Jacob finished high school in America, studied 1 year of engineering at City College before the war interrupted it, and enlisted in February 1942. The army discovered his German during processing and assigned him to a military intelligence support unit attached to the Third Army. He had fought from Normandy through France and into Germany, doing the translation work that kept the intelligence pipeline moving, sitting in on prisoner interrogations, processing captured documents, reading German administrative correspondence with the fluency of a man for whom the language was his first memory. He had not been back to Frankfurt since 1937. He had not seen the Bernerplatz synagogue since the morning his father locked its doors for the last time and put the key in his coat pocket and walked away without looking back. On the afternoon of April 8, 1945, standing in a salt mine in Thuringia with a Torah scroll in his hands, he was looking at the label on the empty crate it had been packed in. The label read Bernerplatz, Frankfurt, and below that a date, November 1938, 3 days after Kristallnacht. Someone had packed his father's Torah scrolls into a crate with professional efficiency 9 days after burning the synagogue they came from. The crate had a stenciled inventory number. The inventory number meant there was a list. The list meant there was someone who made it. SS Georg Lammers was 43 years old, a native of Munich, who had spent his entire adult career in the SS administrative and logistics apparatus. He was not a combat officer and had never sought to be one. He had a background in archival management and museum administration, having worked briefly for the Bavarian State Museum System before joining the SS Cultural Property Administration in 1940, where his professional skills were immediately and systematically redirected toward the management of seized property from occupied territories and Jewish communities. He was a precise, organized man who took genuine professional pride in the accuracy of his inventories and the quality of his cataloguing systems. The Kaiserode mine repository had been under his administrative authority since March 1944, and his management of it had been, by the measure of the SS bureaucratic apparatus he served, exemplary. Every item in the facility was logged, every crate was labelled, every origin point was documented, with the date and method of acquisition and the name of the responsible acquisition officer. The records were thorough because Lammers believed in thorough records. He had been captured at his administrative post near the mine entrance on the morning of April 7th, one day before the American recovery teams went underground. He was being held in a temporary facility in the village school, while the senior officers decided what to do with a man who described himself, with complete technical accuracy, as the repository's administrative director rather than its acquisitions officer. He had not acquired anything himself. He had only received, catalogued, and stored what others brought him. He had told this to the 3 Americans who had spoken to him so far. He intended to keep telling it. By the spring of 1945, the Allies had developed sufficient evidence of the systematic looting of Jewish cultural and religious property across occupied Europe to understand that what they were finding in mines and castles and underground vaults across Germany was not random wartime theft, but organised institutional plunder operating under SS administrative authority with the same documentary rigour that characterised every other aspect of the Reich's bureaucratic machinery. The monuments, fine arts and archives officers attached to the Allied armies had been briefed on what to look for and what the paperwork meant. When the Merkers Mine was opened and the cultural property chamber was found, the implications of the labelling and cataloguing system were immediately understood. Every crate with a Jewish community origin label was not just stolen property. It was evidence of what had happened to the community it came from. The precision of the records that Lammers had maintained so professionally was about to become the most damaging possible testimony against the system he had served. Captain Edward Hartley was the senior intelligence officer assigned to the Merkers recovery operation. He was a 38-year-old attorney from Philadelphia who had spent the past year processing captured documents and had developed a precise understanding of how German administrative records could be read as legal evidence. When his translator, Corporal Stern, came out of the mine chamber and reported what he had found, Hartley listened without interrupting. He listened to the description of the Torah scroll and the crate label and the inventory number and the date. He asked Stern if he was able to continue working. Stern said yes. Hartley said good. He told Stern he had a task for him that was not standard procedure and that Stern did not have to accept it if he felt it compromised his ability to function professionally. He explained what the task was. Stern said yes. Before Hartley finished the sentence, Lammers was brought into the mine director's office, now serving as a temporary interrogation space, at 2:30 in the afternoon. He sat down across the table from Corporal Stern, with the composed efficiency of a man who has answered questions before and knows the shape of the process. He looked at the American corporal across the table and saw a young man with a notepad and a pencil, and an expression he could not immediately read. He asked, in German, whether this was the formal intelligence intake. Stern said yes. He asked Lammers to state his name, rank and position. Lammers did so, giving his administrative title and his description of his role at the facility. He said, as he had said to the others, that he was the repository's administrative director and that his function had been the receipt, cataloguing and secure storage of items transferred to the facility by other SS officers. He said he had not participated in any acquisition actions. Stern wrote this down. He asked Lammers to describe the cataloguing system, Lammers described it with professional precision: the origin labels, the inventory numbers, the transfer documentation, the cross-referenced master ledger he maintained in his office. He was clearly comfortable discussing the system. He had designed it himself, and it was good work. Stern asked him where the master ledger was. Lammers said it was in the filing cabinet in his office near the mine entrance, which American soldiers would now have in their possession. Stern nodded. He reached under the table and produced the master ledger which Captain Hartley had retrieved before the interview. He placed it on the table between them. He opened it to the Frankfurt section. He placed his finger on a specific entry. He read the inventory number aloud. He asked Lammers if he recognized it. Lammers looked at the entry. He said yes. That entry corresponded to a transfer received from the Frankfurt Regional SS Cultural Property Office in November 1938, consisting of religious objects from several Frankfurt Jewish congregations. He said this with the neutral informational tone of a man discussing a filing system. Stern said yes. He said the Torah scroll in crate number 4 of that transfer, which was now sitting on a table in the mine chamber 1,200 feet below where they were currently sitting, came from the Bernplatz synagogue in Frankfurt. He said his father had been the cantor of that synagogue for 22 years. He said his father had led services from that Torah scroll every Shabbat morning of Jacob Stern's childhood. He said his father had locked the doors of the synagogue 9 days before someone in an SS uniform packed the scroll into a crate and labelled it with an inventory number and sent it here. He said he wanted Lammers to look at the inventory entry again and tell him specifically the name of the SS officer who signed the transfer documentation as the originating acquisition officer. He placed the ledger in front of Lammers and pointed to the signature line. He put his pencil to his notepad and waited. Lammers looked at the inventory entry for a long time. Then he read out the name and rank of the acquiring officer listed on the transfer documentation in the same flat professional voice he had been using throughout the interview. His hands were very still on the table. Stern wrote the name down. He turned to the next flagged entry in the ledger and asked Lammers to read the origin location for that transfer. Lammers read it. Stern asked him to read the acquiring officer's signature. Lammers read it. They went through 11 entries in this manner. Stern wrote down every name. When they had finished the flagged entries, Stern closed the ledger and thanked Lammers for his cooperation and told him the interview was concluded. He stood up, picked up the ledger and his notepad, and went to the door. Then he stopped. He said, without turning around, that the master, Lammers, had designed and maintained with such professional care, had just produced a documented list of the names and ranks of the acquisition officers responsible for 11 separate community transfers, including the names of men who had not been captured yet, and were not aware they were in a ledger at all. He said that Lammers' cataloguing system was going to be entered into evidence in proceedings that would determine the legal accountability of every person whose name appeared in it, including the name of the man who had designed the system itself. He said the records were excellent and would hold up well in a formal legal proceeding. He opened the door and walked out. Captain Hartley filed the master ledger as primary documentary evidence that afternoon. It was logged into the Army's War Crimes Evidence Collection System and transferred to the Legal Documentation Unit, preparing material for the Nuremberg proceedings. The 11 acquisition officer names Stern had recorded were added to the wanted persons list maintained by the Allied War Crimes Investigation Authority. Jacob Stern was discharged in December 1945. He returned to Washington and worked in his father's congregation for a year before enrolling at Columbia University on the GI Bill, completing his engineering degree in 1950. He worked for 30 years as a structural engineer for a firm in Midtown Manhattan, retiring in 1980. He married in 1952 and raised 2 sons and a daughter in Forest Hills, Queens, 3 miles from where Aaron Feldman raised his daughters, though the 2 men never met. He never spoke publicly about Merkers or the mine or the ledger or the interview. He spoke about his father's synagogue, often to his children and grandchildren, describing the Burnplatz in the specific detail of someone who has memorized a place against the possibility that the memory might be all that remains of it. In 1988, he travelled to Frankfurt with his eldest son. He stood on the site of the Burnplatz synagogue, which had been destroyed on Kristallnacht and never rebuilt. A commemorative plaque had been installed on the ground where the synagogue's foundation had been. His son took a photograph. In the photograph, Stern is standing with his hands at his sides, looking at the plaque. His face is not visible. The photograph was donated to the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum in Washington by his daughter in 2009, along with his army discharge papers and a single page from a notepad covered in small, careful handwriting, 11 names written in pencil with ranks and dates beside each one. Georg Lammers was held through the Allied prisoner processing system, and his case was referred to the War Crimes Documentation Unit on the basis of the Merkers ledger evidence. He was tried in 1948 in proceedings related to the organised looting of Jewish cultural property and sentenced to 8 years imprisonment. He served 6. He was released in 1954 and returned to Munich, where he found work as an archivist for a private commercial firm. He never gave interviews. He died in 1969. His own cataloguing system, the one he had designed with professional precision and maintained with professional pride, was cited as a primary evidentiary document in 4 separate post-war legal proceedings and remained in active use by researchers investigating the provenance of looted Jewish cultural property for decades after his death. The system was that good. Some historians who have studied the Allied recovery of Jewish cultural property in the final weeks of the European War have argued that the Monuments, Fine Arts and Archives programme was chronically understaffed and under-resourced, given the scale of what it was attempting to document, and that the majority of looted Jewish religious and cultural objects were never returned to their communities of origin, most of which no longer existed as functioning communities by 1945. They note that tens of thousands of Torah scrolls, manuscripts, and ceremonial objects remained in Allied warehouses and displaced persons facilities for years after the war, and that the question of who had the right communities generated legal and ethical debates that have never been fully resolved. Others have pointed to the Merkers recovery and similar operations as evidence that the Allied commitment to documenting and prosecuting cultural looting, however imperfect in execution, established a legal framework for the protection of cultural property in wartime that became the basis of international conventions that are still in force today. What is certain is that Georg Lammers built a cataloguing system so precise that it documented its own crimes completely, and that the young man who sat across the table from him and read the entries aloud had grown up with his hands on the objects those entries described. If you had been Jacob Stern sitting across that table, what would you have done when you found the name of the man who signed the transfer order for your father's Torah scroll? Leave your answer in the comments. And if you believe these stories, the ones that live in ledgers and mine chambers and single pages of notepad covered in pencil, deserve to be read aloud, subscribe, because there are more names still to be found.